Hi and Assalamu alaikum everyone. As you all know from my profile, I will be teaching biology at all texts. The first chapter that we will do is biological molecules, and in this video we'll be doing the introduction of that chapter. So let's get started with the word itself. Now, molecule. Now, what's a molecule? A molecule is anything that is made up of two or more atoms. Okay. Now, we're not just looking at any molecule, we are looking at biological molecules. Now, this word suggests something related to living things. Okay, so that means we'll be dealing with the molecules in living things in this chapter. Okay, with that setup, let's move on to the next thing. Now, the first thing in this chapter is to understand the word protoplasm. Okay, now when we look at this word, we find proto. Proto means first, okay, or primary or basic. So it's first, and plasm means living thing. So it's something related to first or the basic matter of living things, right? So let's go over the original actual definition of this. Now, protoplasm refers to all the different chemical constituents, okay, within the cell that make it a living body. Okay, now anything that's within a cell and that's making the cell a living body, or that's giving that living characteristics, we call that protoplasm. Now we have a few examples here. We can have DNA, we have RNA, we have proteins. Okay, we can also have more examples. For example, we can have ribosomes. Okay, they also come in this. We can have mitochondria. We can have uh, endoplasmic reticulum, both smooth and rough. We can have nucleolus, and the list goes on. Okay, now protoplasm is also called the physical basis of life. As we just talked, that means the protoplasm is the basis on that makes the cell a living thing, right? That gives us living characteristics. Okay, now let's move on to the next thing. We need to know the chemical composition of a cell. Now, what's the cell made up of? Okay, that's basically. Now, a cell is made up of mostly water. As we can see, water constitutes from 60 to 90% of a cell. Okay, so we have proteins then. Okay, they constitute 10 to 20%. Then we have lipids, and they make up 2 to 3%. But in some cases, okay, we have 10% lipid in a cell. For example, in cells of adipose tissue. Why? Because the main function of this tissue is to prevent heat loss. Okay, prevent heat loss. So more fat or more lipids means less heat loss. That's an adaptation of this tissue. Okay, then we have carbohydrates. Okay, we have 1% generally, but in muscle cells we can have up to 3%, and in liver cells we can have up to 6%. Why? Because carbohydrates are needed for a very important process, that is respiration. Okay, so these type of cells, especially the muscle cells and the liver cells, they carry out a lot of respiration, so they need a lot of glucose, which is a carbohydrate. That's why we have a higher amount of carbohydrate compared to other cells. Then we have nucleic acids. Now what are nucleic acids? We'll do that later, okay? But the example of nucleic acid, we have DNA and we have RNA, okay? Ribonucleic acid and deoxyribonucleic acid. And the last thing is inorganic ions. Inorganic ions constitute 1% of a cell. Okay, for example, inorganic ions can be calcium ion. We can have potassium ion. We can have sulfate ion. We can have many ions. Okay, so this is the chemical composition of a cell. Now let us talk about some general things. Okay, now in our body we have about 20 to 30 elements. Okay, and from these 20 to 30 elements we have four important elements. Okay, the four are important, and they are hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen. These are four important elements. And from these four, the most abundant element is hydrogen. But carbon is of particular importance because of two properties. Now we need to study two properties that make carbon unique from all these elements. Okay, now the first property is that it is the smallest tetravalent element. Now it is small because it's pretty it has a very less atomic radius. Okay, it is small and it is tetravalent. Now what does tetravalent means? Now valency means now valent refers to the number of bonds that it can form, and tetra means four. So that means it can form four bonds. So it is the smallest element by size that can form four bonds with other elements, or with itself as well, or with other carbons. Sorry, this is the first property. Okay, for example, we can have the basic example of this is methane. Here carbon forms four bonds with hydrogen, four covalent bonds with hydrogen, like this. Okay, now the second property which makes carbon a unique element is that it shows catenation. Now what is catenation? Now the catenation, okay, it is the formation, it refers to the formation of very strong bonds with other carbons. Now we need to understand what is catenation. Okay, now and why is it important? Now we know that catenation, carbon shows catenation. Now what is the significance of this? Now the significance of this is that using catenation, carbon can form very long chains. Okay, because as we said, it is a very stable element, it's small, and it can form very strong bonds with other carbons. Now the chain can go on and on. Okay. Now why is this important? This is important because in our body we have biological molecules, right? And these molecules are very long chains of carbon. They contain a very long chain of carbons. So we need such element, okay, that can form four bonds. Okay, we cannot have silicon, okay, because even though it can form four bonds, it doesn't show catenation. We can also not have any other group 4 element for this purpose. So that's why carbon is important. Okay, not only these straight chains, carbon can also form ring chains. And this is also important for some biological molecules we learned later. Okay, like this can form these ring chains. Okay, and this is very important. And you can have other elements attached to them as well. Okay, here also we can have hydrogens, we can have any other element attached to them. These So the summary of all this is that carbon is very important because it can form very stable organic compounds. Okay, that is why it's more important. Okay, now due to these two properties, carbon can make long, stable, branched and unbranched chain structures which act as skeletal systems. Okay, that means a backbone for making different types of organic compounds. Okay, now these organic compounds, along with water, forms the physical basis of life. Okay, we studied this term earlier under the heading of protoplasm. Okay, the physical basis of life. Okay, so all these organic compounds along with water form the physical basis of life. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you for listening. We'll continue this in the next video. Till then, take care.